Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gamemakers. Today, we are diving deep into what just might be the most critical battleground in mobile gaming growth today, which is data. So, since Apple's app tracking transparency shook up the industry, UA teams everywhere are grappling with one question: how do we keep our growth advantage when traditional measurement gets complicated? Well, the answer is in your data, and today we're going straight to the source. So, joining me is Roi Nam, founder and CEO of Airbridge, a company at the forefront of helping studios master the post-ATT world as one of the most dynamic and emerging MMPs in the market today. So, Roy is an expert in navigating practical strategies like SKAN, CAPI, web to app attribution, and he's also pioneering AI driven monetization with Airflux, helping studios turn machine learning based data insights into real revenue lifts on their game products. So, if you are a UA lead, a product manager, marketer, or an executive trying to get ahead of the curve, this episode is for you. But before we start, I do want to warn the audience that this discussion is not meant to be a high level, superficial, sort of hand wavy talk. We will go in depth and in a lot more technical detail than usual. However, I do think if you really do want to get that real advantage in the market today, it is critical to really understand these things in a very deep and nuanced way. So, with that, welcome, Roy, and I think we can get right into it. So, first question, Roy, I thought we could just start by kind of setting the stage. So, where are we today in terms of, and we can start with iOS, but iOS measurement and performance tracking today?
Yeah, for sure, JK. So first of all, thanks for allowing me to join the podcast today. Definitely, just a little bit of myself and the Airbridge and Airflux as a company. We've been here in this industry for the last 10 years. Seeing a lot of these changes happening right now. And today, definitely, I want to talk about some of these changes that was made 4 years ago, which was iOS 14.5 and ATT. So, it's been over 4 years since Apple introduced ATT with iOS 14.5. And honestly, even now, many marketers I spoke with in many of these places, especially last week, I was in MEU Las Vegas, and there's all still saying it's really hard to measure iOS performance. Even the bigger ones tell me that as well. So we're still very much in a process of adapting, and the challenges generally fall into two categories. I would say first is the visibility loss, which makes it harder to measure campaigns' performance accurately. And the second, we call it signal loss. So, which kind of affects the quality of user data going back to ad platforms, making targeting less effective. So we need to differentiate these two kinds of problems, visibility loss and signal loss, to better address these two problems respectively. So although there are still plenty of challenges when it comes to iOS measurement, we've also seen some real progress, like both from Apple and from industry stakeholders like the SAN, CSPs who've stepped up with compensatory strategies and the tools. So let's break it down. I would say, some of the progresses, definitely we need to understand that SKAN, there has been a lot of major updates to SKAN itself. So we've gone from version 2.0 to 4.0 right now. And now you get up to 3 postbacks, which used to be like 1 postback, covering a longer conversion window. And you also get more granularity with more data like a 4-digit source identifier, the source app ID, and even the source domain. So these additions help advertisers get better insight while preserving user privacy through CROT anonymity. And second progress could be, major platforms like Meta and Google have built their own privacy preserving, yet, matching algorithm within their attribution frameworks, like Meta's AEM, Aggregated Advanced Measurement, or Google's ICM. So these are sometimes also called hybrid or advanced SAN solutions, and they're giving advertisers more touch points and helping recover some of the visibility loss under ATT. Third, I can definitely mention there's CAPI, which is abbreviation of Convergence API, which is becoming widely adopted. So many advertisers are now sending richer server-side event data like purchases, signups with click IDs, hashed emails, or hashed phone numbers directly to these platforms using their API. So this kind of like improves match quality and gives these algorithms better data to optimize performance. We're just with two left, fourths and a fifth. So fourth, strategies like web to app are seeing more adoption. Maybe you have seen a lot of people posting about web to app strategies on LinkedIn. So these campaigns rely on web traffic to guide users into app, often through a landing page with a quiz funnel, or the playables on the landing page is a flexible and creative workaround that steps aside some of the limitations of iOS app install campaigns. Fifth and the last, more advanced advertisers are turning to like holistic measurement frameworks, like leveraging lip studies or triple M marketing mix modeling. So these methods help validate performance and provide broader understanding of what's really driving outcomes. It's totally based on aggregate level data, so no longer you need to depend on some of these user level or individual level identifiers like ad IDs. So all of these things combined, I want to say that iOS measurement definitely presents a lot of challenges, but still, there's a lot of more tools, more workarounds, and smarter strategies than ever before. So it's no longer about relying on a single method, it's about combining all of these multiple approaches to get the full picture. Was it
So
too long?
Roy, yeah, so that was quite a lot to kind of take in, but just to kind of
Hmm.
give a little bit more context to the audience. So it sounds like with on the iOS side, based upon the changes post ATT, it's a more complicated landscape, right? And you mentioned a lot of things. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
we could, in just terms of recap, you mentioned scan changes to scan. You mentioned things in terms of what some of the SANs are doing, like Meta's AEM and Google's ICM. Uh, you have CAPI, you've got web to app, you've got you've got all these things. And so, like, the landscape itself is very complicated and is changed post ATT, at least on the iOS side. And we can go into more detail and we'll go into, for our audience, we'll go into depth into each of these different areas as well. But when you think about the landscape itself and based upon the changes that occurred, generally speaking, when there's a change in the industry, there's generally like winners and losers. And so, what would you say are the impact of some of these changes have been in terms of who some of those winners and losers are? From your perspective, who would those be?
Got it. So I wouldn't call it winners or losers, which is
Okay.
kind of a little bit binary in a way, but it's definitely true that a lot of advertisers are getting these challenge changes are presenting more challenges to the advertisers in terms of
Right.
visibility, in terms of signals. So a lot of things to learn if you're a marketer or UA manager in a gaming studio, if you're especially coming from a smaller studio background, it's gonna be really difficult for you to understand all of these things. But believe me, you need to because all of these things, there's no such thing as a single source of truth or a single method that kind of solves everything. So as a UA manager in a smaller gaming studio, you have to actually spend time learning about all these new concepts and the strategy and the tools and try to mix them together, blend them well,
Right.
and use them well. Yeah.
So then, practically, then, when you think about all of these different kind of approaches and maybe some of the in terms of the data signals, can you talk about what would be some of the most impactful data signals that you're seeing studios leverage to get the best UA performance?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a little bit of a biased answer, since especially
Okay.
since I'm coming from the Airbridge side, the MMP side.
Sure.
But still, great question. I still believe the most impactful data signals that studios are relying upon day to day, right now, still come from MMP data. Unless you're actually using just one channel, maybe if you're using just Meta, the single channel, you can be actually relying upon the Meta's dashboard. If you're using Google as your single channel, you might be just using Google's dashboard and using the reporting systems or the Firebase to get the reporting. But at least if you're spending like 30K USD per month on UA, have a various channels, like at least two to three, you must be using MMP because that's the only kind of source that you can get the cross-channel insight on your campaigns. So you need to rely upon MMP data. But when you do that, basically there are two types of major attribution data that MMP provides to you. First is the classic attribution data. So this is like where it gets a little technical. On iOS, attribution is primarily right now based on probabilistic matching. because on iOS you understand that ad IDs are only get fetched once the user consent on the ATT. So
Right.
basically,
And probabilistic is essentially a euphemism for fingerprinting, right? Basically.
that word is prohibited in the industry.
Yeah.
I would not dare to use that
Okay.
word. But of
Okay.
course, like probabilistic matching is kind of a similar concept to fingerprinting, using all kinds of these generic attributes like IP addresses, device width, height, OS model, and some of these
Okay.
data that you're getting from user agent or from the
Sure.
device side, matching them together, both from the touchpoint side and the conversion side. But actually, some of these probabilistic data, um, you know, are designed to be in a more privacy, preserving ways, so that it does not actually, go back to the old like fingerprinting days. But it's kind of a similar concept. You're right about that. Yeah.
Just thinking about the current state of data limitations. And
Hmm.
so, you mentioned that we still, at least on the Android side, have the classic data signals. iOS, it's a little bit of a different story. But can you give us a brief overview in terms of when you think about the differences as far as data? Maybe you could make that a little bit more concrete for the audience as far as when we think about data limitations on iOS
Hmm.
versus Google. And now increasingly, you mentioned before some of these web to app and some of these other kinds of
Mm.
data that we're able to get, whether it's from and we can talk about it, but on the server side or whatever related to the web. So when you think about iOS versus Android versus web, could you break that down for us?
If I am to just like do the breakdown, I when it comes to Android, and when it comes to visibility, Android is much more relaxed compared to iOS. So you've still got the Google Play referral system, which kind of helps with click-based deterministic tracking, and the advertising ID is really easy to access since it's opt-out based. So you don't need to get the explicit consent first to get the advertising ID. You just get it by default unless user opts out from the tracking system. And no need to explicitly ask for consent like iOS for sure. And Android just remains as flexible as it was before. And advertisers generally feel they're getting enough visibility for their Android campaign. So if you meet people at the conference, or if I talk with our clients, nobody complains about Android visibility. So
Right.
it's there. And then it comes web. So, web is definitely more trackable than just pure iOS, because you can carry parameters with clicks. So whenever you click, these tracking links on the website or web campaigns, a lot of these, a lot of these parameters just tag along with the click itself to the URL of the website. So definitely, it is very accurately tracked in most of these circumstances. However, even for web, because web is dependent on browsers, and browsers are sitting on the OS itself, so the privacy measures are tightening, especially on browsers like Safari, because they're on the iOS system. So Safari, there's something called Intelligent Tracking Prevention, ITP, which kind of limits how long cookies last. Sometimes these third-party cookies can last only 24 hours if they're set with URL parameters. So plus, there is something called privacy relay on the iOS system, which can hide IP addresses, making tracking with probabilistic matching even trickier. But
Right.
since it's like still better than iOS, I would put web as a second most flexible system out there. And lastly, iOS. So I was kind of like, halfway, explaining about this classic attribution. So of course, for iOS, you can still rely upon probabilistic matching. And also we need to, think about this SKAN, um, which is also by default the holy grail of iOS tracking right now. Of course, with a lot of limitations. So probabilistic matching, SKAN, and you need to also definitely utilize still the ATT. So it requires app to get explicit consent to access the IDFA. The problem though is that consent rate is still low, only about 20 to 40% of the users opting in. So it's a combination of all these three: probabilistic matching, SKAN, and also ATT based like deterministic matching, all combined can constitute iOS tracking. So in summary, Android offers a lot more flexibility when it comes to tracking. iOS has strict privacy controls with ATT, and web kind of falls somewhere in between. Still great for click-based tracking, but facing like increasing privacy restrictions by Safari.
And maybe I think it'd be very useful if, because for some of our audience who may not be familiar with some of the measurement strategies that you mentioned, and there are a lot of them, I thought maybe we could just go maybe one by one and talk in a little bit more depth as far as each of those strategies is concerned. And if there are other ones that you didn't mention, maybe we could talk about those as well. So could we just kind of go down the list and then maybe talk about each one and just kind of give a high level description for some of the audience who might, maybe they're not marketers, maybe they're product managers, or maybe they're executives or someone learning marketing. It'd be great for you to kind of give us a little bit of a high level view as far as what each of those measurement strategies is and how they work.
So it's kind of like maybe it's kind of a recap of what I just like mentioned
Mhm.
earlier in this discussion. So
Yeah.
you need to split between this visibility thing and the signal thing. So when it comes to visibility, it's kind of mix of all. So we mentioned the SKAN, which is the
Mhm.
Apple's alternative attribution framework. We can actually
Yeah.
deep dive into the SKAN and how to really raise the ATT consent rate later on. And we actually do have a web to app, which is kind of a rising strategy. Pretty straightforward. You send users to the website or the landing page, or using the links, using the web campaigns to send users to the App Store to download the app from there. So this is web to app strategy. We also can talk about advanced matching or measurement algorithm that are provided by SANs out there, like Meta's like AEM or Google's ICM. Some of these things are certainly giving additional touch points to the advertisers for better visibility. Then maybe some of the more advanced use cases of the lift studies. Lift studies, what we mean by lift study is kind of a running the A/B test, the holdout test, using some of the platform's features like Meta's lift study or Google's like convergent lift is something that is used by some of the more advanced advertisers. And lastly, something that we've been hearing quite some time recently is like a marketing mix modeling. So this is more like a strategical approach because you're leveraging your own machine learning model or the open source models to run the MMM, which is not dependent on the user level IDs. But so that is the reason why this being more appreciated nowadays. So on the other hand, we can talk about signals. So we talked about CAPI, the convergence API. This is kind of relatively new and really powerful. It's a tool that allows advertisers to send additional signals directly to the platforms like Meta, improving optimization because it comes with a better matching rate. We can talk about that. And lastly, just a little bit of light into signal engineering, this concept. So because all of these campaigns out there are getting so much automated, you need to be careful in choosing which user behavior signals to send to the platforms in the first place. So this kind of signal engineering is also worth highlighting.
Okay.
So
And
all of
got
these,
it.
yeah.
Right. And so just to kind of break this down in a little bit more. So you talked about two concepts, and I just want to make that clear for the audience. You talked about visibility and you talked about signals. And visibility means what kind of measurement strategy do you use to get more accuracy, right? So like, for example, on the iOS side anyway, it is hard to get accuracy. And then on the signal side means how do we send more data in some way? And so all of these measurement strategies that you have described are ways to do one of those two things.
You're right.
Um,
Yeah.
Scan would be used in the context of Apple support for giving you some kind of attribution data. Web to app would be just to like help describe these things for our audience would be when you go from a website and you send them to try to install a mobile app, right? Uh, the SANs, the self-attributed networks like Meta and Facebook, also have some measurement things, which is the things that you talked about, which we could go into more detail about. And the lift studies is more about, if I understand this correctly, it's more about like incrementality, where you kind of see where you are and you try to measure the impact of some kind of campaign. So you kind of see what the difference was.
Yeah.
And MMM, I don't know a lot about MMM, but it seems like at least some of the people I talk to just have told me, don't worry about MMM. Yeah, it works, but you need a massive scale for it. But maybe we could talk about that later as well.
For sure.
And then some of these other things that you've mentioned,
Hmm.
CAPI, for example, is a concept that is newer to me. It seems like it's related to web, but wondering if maybe we could focus in on CAPI, because that may be something. I think some of the other measurement strategies may be a little bit more familiar to our audience, but
Hmm.
CAPI in particular, could you talk about what is sent through CAPI? What is it, and why is it valuable?
Maybe CAPI might be a kind of a new concept unless you're really actively spending a lot of money on some of these like channels like Google Meta, TikTok, or X or Snap, because CAPI are the ones that are mostly supported by these bigger SANs. And the initial reason why CAPI came into place is because when we think of the modern, advertising platforms out there, the very basic principle that they always go by is that they actually target the users that are most likely to make installs, that are most likely to make IPs, or they're most likely to make ad impressions. And how do they find these users who are most likely to do ABC is based on the past user behavioral data. So simply put, like we just send the users who have installed the app so far. And they, based on this data of users who have already installed the app, they want to find those users that are most similar to the users who have already installed the app. So, when it comes to this basic principle, we can understand that, the more that we send, the more accurate data and more matching, if that happens on their side, the more training data that they can achieve to, better utilize for training their models to find the users who are most likely to conduct action ABC. So in this context, the CAPI is just about sending more signals, richer signals, using additional identifiers like hashed emails, hash phone numbers, and click IDs. And why is it important is because some of these mobile postback out there, especially for iOS, they're heavily relying upon advertising ID. And also on the website, we understand that third-party cookies tend to decay and they have a shorter lifespan. So in order for us to increase the matching rate between the IDs of ours and IDs of theirs, which are the advertising platforms, it's always beneficial for you to send some of these additional identifiers like hashed emails, phone numbers, or click IDs. So this comes with higher matching rate, which in turn helps you, have a better efficiency when it comes to the targeting algorithm. So, in the context of gaming, CAPI is super useful for those, especially PC console gaming companies. So,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, there's a lot of like free to play games nowadays on Steam, and it's truly a game changer. So, up until now, if you were running a game on Steam, you couldn't send any in-game signals to platforms like Meta, Google, TikTok, or X or Snap. They don't let you install pixels or SDKs on Steam games, right? But with CAPI, you can finally send some of these in-game signals, and you can optimize your campaigns based on these in-game signals. And that's exactly what we do as the Airbridge platform with Nexon with their first descendant game. Uh, there's a case study on our website that we use CAPI to send signals to TikTok, and TikTok use it to target those customers or gamers that are most likely to be interacting with those FPS looter shooter games, which kind of resulted in enhanced accuracy.
Right. So it kind of sounds like what's happening is by sending these networks uh, these additional signals, this additional data, it helps them with their audience develop, for example, lookalike audiences, similar to what Facebook has been doing for a very long time. And even though there's no UDID or things of that nature, by having these other identifiers, you can then help identify who those players are and then use the standard types of matching algorithms that have already been used before through machine learning and things like that to get the better performance. Is that correct, Roy?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so when you talk about what you did with Nexon, could you dive into that in a little bit more detail? So what did that look like in terms of what it took for them to roll that kind of a program out and what kind of performance increase that they saw?
Hmm. there's no such like official metrics, but from my experience with our customers, CAPI usually
Yeah.
help with small but steady like improvements, typically
Mhm.
around 3 to 5% uplift in ROAS, which is not small at all, but
Yeah.
which is not big enough. However, that's not always guaranteed. Sometimes the additional matching keys you send don't help that much, or the matching rate could be still low. So it's something that you should do if you have the extra development resources, but don't expect a dramatic change overnight. So
Okay.
now we talked about this Nexon First Descendant case, which is a free-to-play looter shooter PC console game on Steam and other platforms. So it was most of the cases when it comes to Steam games, people actually run two types of campaigns. They want to just like send users directly to Steam platform with UTM parameters on it and use the Steam's like UTM tracking feature to see how many wish lists are getting added. Or sometimes they understand how many downloads they're getting from using the UTM parameters. However, the shortcomings of using the Steam's like basic UTM trackers is actually two things. First, it's only click based. It doesn't actually take into account the view and the impressions. Second, it doesn't really help you understand the down funnel in-game purchases, especially as a free-to-play game. So when it comes to those kind of free-to-play games, you need to actually be collecting some of these events, in-game downstream events like purchases or onboarding complete, tutorial complete, level 10
Mhm.
achievement, these kind of events,
Yeah.
send them to the server side, and in turn, either the MMP or your own developers just setting up CAPI can in turn send them again to servers like Meta, Google, TikTok, Snapchat, X, and then eventually you can utilize these events that are matched with hashed emails or phone numbers that are gaining from your app gamers, in-game gamers, to utilize them for target optimization for your campaigns.
Another kind of concept that kind of comes up from time to time in a measurement strategy that you mentioned, which is there's kind of two flows, right? Which is like web to app and web to app. Could you talk about those two flows and how is that related to CAPI, if at all?
Yeah, totally. So this is kind of a new concept because most of the
Mhm.
times this web to app or even web to app flows are mostly adopted by like subscription apps out there or the
Okay.
contents like online comics or the short drama apps out there. But more and more we see that because of the cross-platform nature of these games, like maybe HTML5 games, mini games, or the playables on the landing pages, we see this web to app or web to app strategies being more adopted by the gaming studios. And we cannot miss out, the recent changes in external links on the App Store due to the rulings of the court that the
Mhm.
web shops are gaining more traction nowadays in a gaming ecosystem. So because of these, rising trends, there are more, I would say, spotlight to web to app and web to app campaigns. So let me
Yeah.
explain this
Could
quickly.
you describe the difference between those two? What is web to app? What is web to app?
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of there's only a subtle nuance difference, but let me explain. In a web to app campaign, a very strict web to app campaign, users are sent directly to the App Store through a tracking link, either
Mhm.
as a final URL or an embedded in a tracking template. So the key difference here is that you may like question yourself, oh, like isn't it just the same like with the app promotion campaign? But the key difference here is that instead of using iOS app install or app promotion campaigns, marketers choose web traffic campaign first as a campaign type. And
Right.
then they use the tracking links to send users to the App Store directly. So there's a whole lot of difference between you using the app promotion campaigns or the web traffic campaigns, but to optimize for app downloads. So that's kind of a whole difference. And second is a web to app flow, which is kind of a more kind of default basic settings. Here it's easy. You send the users not to the App Store, but you send users directly to the web page, like a landing page or the quiz or the playables or the any kind of HTML5 games, and then let the users redirect it to the App Store via a CTA button, like install the app, or you can just show them a pop up when they play the game for like 1 minute. You just pop up, or you just put a model asking them to download the app to continue kind of playing. So now here's the exciting part. Recently, SANs like Meta and Google have started attaching click IDs in their post specs for web traffic campaigns. So this means you can now tie in-app events back to those web campaigns and even optimize your campaigns based on those in-app events, not just like with the web pixel. So take it a step further, you can layer on CAPI to send even more enriched signals back to the platforms as well. So both web to app or web to app are, increasingly more adopted by the gaming studios, which are originally come from a subscription app space. I believe, with the advent of more of these web shops, I think this can be also valid strategies for gaming studios in the future.
Right. And do you have specific examples of highly effective funnels for either web to app or web to app, and then maybe you can explain why did some of these work so well, just for our audience who might want to think about implementing some of these flows.
Yeah, so the obvious one example is when you send users to a web shop and use banners to guide them into the app once they make a purchase, or even when they're considering making purchases, you can still show them this web to app banners, like install the app or launch the game on mobile. So it's kind of a simple funnel, but it's effective, especially for games with users who are already interested in buying. You can even retarget your existing mobile users to the web shop, let them download, let them actually re-engage into the app, into game by using the deep links as well. Another example is using HTML5 games or playables as a landing page. So these games, can hook people right away and then use a CTA button to move them onto the app. So I've seen these cases with some of the lightweight MMORPG games out there. So you just like, when you actually are landing on their website, immediately the engine runs on the browser, and then you're just like put into the village. You can start your journey right now. And once you just kind of like kill some of these monsters around the village and you reach like a level 2 to 3, they will ask you to sign up. And once after signing up, they'll ask you to download the app. So this is kind of another web to app flow that I'm spotting.
Right.
Some of these subculture lightweight games can also do that, not just the MMORPG games. And lastly, I would say kind of quizzes or surveys is kind of a pre-registration flow. You can actually ask users to, for example, let's just say you're having a huge IP. Let's just say I'm a big fan of Star Wars. Like, let's just say that you do a quiz, like, and then like people select some of these answers, like what's your favorite show? Is it Andor or is it like Rogue One or something like that? Mandalorian. You can click some of these answers, like solving the quiz, and eventually with these answers, you can also ask them to download the app or register for the upcoming release of a Star Wars IP-based mobile game. So these kind of flows all fall under the concept of web to app or web to app kind of user flow.
Okay. And then because it's web to app, I assume App Store policies don't apply to these flows. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're less restricted. And important thing is once user clicks some of these URLs, a lot of these parameters are deterministically remain on the website, which can be collected by web SDKs or the smart scripts. So definitely you will have a better visibility. And time to time, even for the campaign efficiency, I've seen some campaigns getting bigger, a higher ROAS compared to some of these app promotion campaigns. This is kind of what you will only understand after running multiple types of campaigns at once. But I've seen many cases where web to app campaigns or web to app campaigns even perform better than the straightforward app promotion campaigns.
Okay. And kind of going back to that big list of stuff that you mentioned, one of the other things that you mentioned are some of the measurement strategies from the SANs. And so Meta in particular has AEM, for example. So could you talk about AEM? And then they've got like 8 conversion events or something of that nature. I don't understand it that well. It'd be great to hear from you what it is, and then how do advertisers use these conversion events?
Yeah. So when it comes to AEM, it's actually better for you to understand it as just one of the 3 options that you can choose when running iOS app promotion campaigns. The other 2 options are obviously SKAN, and web to app that we just talked about. So you can just use just one of these 3 or 2 of these 3, or you can just mix them together and see how it goes with all of these campaign times respectively. So the important thing is not really necessarily about understanding AEM itself. It's about testing all 3 methods and seeing which one works best for your particular game title and your marketing strategy.
Okay.
So you know, a lot of marketers, they tend to favor AEM because SKAN sometimes is kind of a bit more complex, and it takes a lot of patience for you to get the results, like 2 to 4 days of post-spec delay. Plus, like SKAN is really tricky. So a lot of marketers, they prefer using AEM nowadays. So sometimes I even encounter marketers, they don't use SKAN at all. But that said, I just like believe that, you know, trying out all three methodologies together and see which one works best for you is really important, because I have also encountered marketers who say that SKAN campaigns work better for them. Like for example, I met some like mid-core idle RPG marketers who told me that SKAN campaigns work really well for them. So it's kind of a testing and seeing the data to make a final decision.
Right. And I think part of the limitation with SKAN is just the sparseness or the limitation in terms of the data. But with between 2 and 4, there's more data, right? Like Apple's starting to open it up a little bit. Do you think they'll open up more in the future so that SKAN becomes even more usable, hopefully, in the future?
Yeah, it must be because like I know that Apple has been adding a lot of things. You know, from the 2.0 to 4.0, there has been a lot of updates. Although I wouldn't really say that even with all of these updates, people still think that SKAN is really tricky and then hard to use. But there's been some major updates so far. Like, you know, SKAN used to have just one postback, but now it
Mhm.
has like three
Yeah.
postback, the second and the third.
Yeah. So it's 3 times as good, right?
Yeah, which is great. But you need to understand the second and the third ones, they do not have the fine grain conversion values. So it's kind of
Mm.
a coarse conversion values, like the high, middle, and low. So they're like less usable than the first one, but still
Right,
not
right, right.
the third. And second, you actually have, you know, 4-digit source identifier. We used to have only 2 digits, so you could only track up to 99 campaigns using SKAN, but now with these 2 more digits, you can track more. If you actually reach the tier 3 of crowd anonymity, you can get the source app ID, which is really the, you know, app store ID of certain app that show the ads of your game title. You also have the source domain, which is the website that show the ads. So a lot of these richer data came into place, which can be
Mhm.
useful. But still, because of a lot of these restrictions like crowd anonymity, random postspec delays, and the very hard concept of setting the conversions value of the SKAN, many marketers just feel very difficult to use SKAN nowadays. Yeah. Mm.
Right. And then there's also like this issue around multi postback windows. Could you explain that? That's like 0 to 2 days, 3 to 7 days, 8 to 3. I don't
Yeah.
quite understand that very well. Could you
Mhm.
explain that part?
Got it. So the straightforward, simple answer to that is you don't need to mind too much on the second
Okay.
or the third postback. The reason
Okay.
why is, you know, as a marketer, you need to make quick changes to your media mix. You need to actually every day you need to be scrutinizing the numbers, crunching the numbers of each creative uh, campaign and the channels, and just waiting another like 14 days or 35 days doesn't really make sense. So that is the reason why we would usually recommend studios and smaller studios and UA marketers just to focus on the first postback. So here's why that makes sense. First, the initial postback is delivered within about 4 days. So earliest 2 days, latest 4 days. So within 2 to 4 days, you just like get the results, which is kind of fast enough to actually influence creative testing, campaign optimization. You know, you can be as patient as 7 days, right? So you get the feedback while it still matters. And second, first postback is the only postback that includes fine-grained conversion value up to 64 combinations, which gives you a way more insight compared to the course value that you get in the later postback, the second and the third one. And lastly, those fine-grained values are also backward compatible with SKAN 3.0. So many
Mhm.
people believe that once it got updated to 4.0, it's all 100% done. But no, actually 3.0 still exists. And then you need to have this compatibility between 3.0 and 4.0. And you need to remember that under 3.0, there were no such thing as the second postback or the third postback. So keep things manageable. We strongly recommend optimizing around that first postback window. It's where you get the most data, the fastest feedback, and frankly, the highest ROI on your effort. But if you actually want to go further from that point, you can start leveraging the second and the third postspec, and just interpreting the results from these two, and optimize your campaigns.
Any other tips or tricks on SKAN, or should we move on to some of the other measurement strategies that you talked about?
Yeah, well, actually a lot, but let me
Okay.
simplify that into just three things. Many people talk about SKAN, but sometimes I believe what matters more than SKAN and is more ROI impactful is the ATT consent itself.
Right.
So, simply more users who opt in, the more advertising IDs you get, which kind of gives you better visibility through your MMP, and your advertising platforms can perform better.
Yeah.
So think of SKAN always as a plan B. So always plan A should be ATT constant. So I want to actually share with you some of these, proven ways to boost the ATT opt-in rates. So why does it matters is I've seen some of the studios doing it well, and who
Uh-huh.
have raised their ATT constant rate from almost like 10, 15% to even 40 to 50% maximum,
Okay.
which are dramatic. So some of the things that you can definitely do is first like using like pre-prompts. Like explain to the gamers why you're asking. You can even tell them that, oh, this is like important for us to keep developing the great products, so we need this data. So, how will it improve their experience and so on? So a clear, friendly pre-prompt build trust and transparency. And I've seen some of the smaller studios just directly asking users, can you please opt in for ATT, and which worked like magic. And second is definitely you should customize the AT prompt, test it out. And lastly, it's kind of a trick that you can also ask the users who have already unconsented to consent later on. So it's
Hmm.
actually possible for you to revert the settings from opt out to opt in. When you go into the settings of each like application, you can actually turn it back on. So maybe time to time, you can actually just show them, in-game messages, asking them to turn on the ATT back and deep link them into the setting page of the that application. So definitely SKAN is something that is really important. But before that, I want to give out this very practical advice of optimizing the ATT constant rate first.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. And yeah, it sounds like going from 10 to 40 to 50% sounds pretty huge. So yeah, I've seen some of those tricks. I do think they're simple tricks, but seem to be fairly effective. So maybe moving on now, I do think one area or one measurement strategy that seems to be a little bit controversial, just because of a number of folks who, some people say you should understand MMM. Others are like, well, you need massive scale and this and that. So can you give us your perspective? So
Mhm.
how are mobile studios practically in real practice implementing MMM? Is that actually happening? Uh, Based upon your real world customers, what are you seeing?
Maybe before talking about some of the real steps that you can take to implement the MMM, you need to understand that MMM is kind of not easy for the smaller studios, especially since that it's all about coding stuff and using some of these open source models out there like Robin or Meridian by Google. So definitely, you need to be having at least like 2 to 3 people dedicated to data science or data analysis. So if you're large enough to afford the MMM as part of your measurement stack, then I would certainly advise you to try it out, because many studios out there have benefited from using MMM as a complementary measure to whatever they're having. So I definitely recommend it. So some of the practical steps that you could take is certainly if you have 2 to 3 people, at least a full-time or the part-time BI team,
Yeah.
and if you are a casual mid-core studio, certainly you can explore that. And the first step could be selecting the model. So fortunately, some of the bigger ones like Meta or Google, they actually are providing the open source models that you can easily leverage to run the MMM models by yourself. So one is the Robin of Meta. And the second is Meridian by Google. So they actually have slightly different philosophies, because Meta's model is more on the frequentist model, whereas the Google's model is more on the Bayesian model. These are the statistical terms, but
Mhm.
you can choose whatever that fits you well. And second is you need to choose your variables, but it's kind of a preset thing. First is the marketing variables, which are most likely be the cost data or the impression count on a daily basis per channel, country, and OS. And certainly you need to choose the target variable, which you are analyzing. Eventually, could be a revenue, could be a downloads, could be even like some other things like a purchase count. So you need to set them right. And lastly, something that we call as context variables. So context variables are like the external variables outside of the app itself or the marketing activities themselves that might affect the target variable. And this includes seasonality. This can also include the App Store rankings or your competitors' App Store rankings, or some of these external variables that might affect the target variable outside of these marketing activities. And then step 3, 4, 5. Step 3, calibrate the model by running the lift studies, like Meta's lift study or the Google's conversion lift to calibrate the model. This part is really necessary because the models themselves do not guarantee the accuracy unless you actually calibrate them with the ground truth, the guaranteed truth, which are the incrementality. You can check the model accuracy by using some of the statistical metrics like R squared, MAPE, or MCMC conversions. And lastly, after all these things that your data science team must have gone through, you can finally run the model almost like every week or every month. And the calibration that I mentioned in the third step can be done in every like 3 to 6 months. So lastly, important thing is the interpretation of the MMM results. So we've been done some of these case studies with Google and some of the casual gaming studios out there like Amanotes or Aloha Factory. And most of these cases, there's a huge gap between what you will see in the MMP dashboard versus what you will see from your MM models. So don't panic because they're born differently. They need to be interpreted in a different ways. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually, use the budget optimization feature of MMM to really just, really find out those channels that you should increase the budget or to decrease the budget from. So you can actually reallocate some of your budget using the MMM's budget optimization feature. And second, you need to definitely attend to those channels that show the biggest discrepancy between last touchpoint attribution versus the MMM. So those who show the biggest discrepancy are the ones that you might want to take a deeper look into and think about the reasons why this channel is so much overstated under last touchpoint model. When it comes to MMM, it shows kind of a less contribution.
Okay, yeah. So sounds really complicated, but I think one of the main things I took away is that clearly, like, if you need to have 2 to 3 dedicated data science as well, or potentially BI folks on staff, it does seem like you do need at least some level of scale to basically justify 3 additional hires, for example. And yeah, I thought we could now shift towards an area that I think is very exciting for me because I think this is kind of a newer kind of frontier, but or maybe it's not so new, but maybe we could talk about this because we have been talking about UA, but kind of pivoting over to a monetization and how does monetization and the data that we get from monetization also feed into UA. There's been some discussion about how they're related. I wanted to get your sense of, in terms of how your customers are actually using some of this data, and from what you're seeing in the industry, how are they related? How does this monetization data feed back into UA?
There's a lot of things to say about this, and I'm also equally excited about, talking about this topic. I can definitely tell, the audience and you that monetization and UA are just tightly correlated to each other, and more so in the future. And actually, this is already happening in a modern, DSP world. Take Adlovin, for example. They don't allow users to run tier OS campaigns without using their mediation solution M11 Max. And potentially the reason for this is that these platforms have access to symmetric first-party data and bidding information from their mediation systems, which could heavily influence the user acquisition algorithm and ultimately the results themselves. And some of the numbers out there back this up. So I recently read an article by GameBiz Consulting, and they say that MLovin and Unity both perform 4 times better when using their own mediation platforms. So these stats are just based on their own like GameBiz Consulting clients, so it's definitely worth noting. So you can definitely tell that these data, mediation side data, are getting used for UA algorithms. And another interesting thing that we're seeing is that more and more platforms are using ad impressions for their target optimization campaigns. And one interesting example is definitely Meta. Meta surprisingly didn't actually have this kind of setting to allow users to optimize for ad impressions. But from January 1st this year, they kind of like unlocked this feature for Android ad promotion campaigns that they can use the ad impressions as a target optimization event, which has been already done for many like DSPs like MLovin or other like Moloko or Liftup or other app pure DSPs out there. But the fact that someone like Meta is opening this up is actually really crucial kind of fact that IAA is being regarded as very important signal to even the bigger platforms, and those who are
Mhm.
not following this trend, I believe, will follow this trend really soon.
Okay, and it seems like you also. So I guess that'll be an ongoing area that it'll be exciting to see kind of new things happening in. But I also want to ask you guys about Airflux.
Mhm.
So maybe you could also talk about Airflux and then how does Airflux leverage user data?
Well, just to introduce about Airflux, which is the product developed by Airbridge team, is an AI-powered ad monetization engine, which kind of helps casual gaming companies optimize interstitial ad timing, frequency, and the cooldown, as well as the rewarded videos payout amount, to really help them maximize the user LTV. So we have been working with leading casual gaming studios in the world and have seen great results, like ranging from like 10 to 50% of the user LTV uplift. So one of the reasons why we built this tool in the first place is we believe that the ECPMs of these publishers out there are getting like a little bit slowing down. So we know that there's a lot of things that happen in the course of the last few years that the lengths of the videos got much longer from like 30 seconds to sometimes like 60 seconds. But we also understand that more of these publishers are heavily monetizing through IAA, thinking about the hyper casual gaming studios or hybrid casual gaming studio, mid-core, light core, they all monetize through IAA in the countries like T2, T3 countries, and even with the entire user base. And with all these frequency increased, we're still seeing that the CAC LTV ratio reaching at 1 is really hard to achieve. And also, people are doing a lot of these segmentations and A/B testing when it comes to monetization. And I've seen much of these work has been done pretty manually, hand job, or using the Google spreadsheets to just like adjust some of these variables, which is really time consuming and inefficient. So then we decided to build this kind of agentic service, Airflux, to help them predict the LTV, segment users, auto segment the users into many different buckets, run the A/B testing, and use the reinforcement learning to keep enhancing these ad policies so that they can reach the optimal level of frequency at timing for interstitial ads and also payout rewards for the rewarded videos.
Okay, so there's a lot there. Could you maybe walk us through exactly like the flow of how Airflux works? And then basically what it does, and you might be repeating yourself a little bit, but sorry, I'm a little bit slow here. And then how quickly it adapts and the kind of optimizations that are happening through some of these like AI initiatives, whether it's agentic or otherwise.
I can just like go back to the genesis of this project, this product.
Okay.
We were working with a casual gaming company with a very I was a successful title with 10 million MAU that are
Mhm.
played by like people around like 30, 40 different countries, T1, T2, T3, all well mixed. So when we were actually working with them, what odd thing that we realized is that for every users from every country, the first interstitial ad timing is always the same. But when you think of it, it's a little bit weird because those users that are playing this game from Philippines will certainly differ from those users that are playing games in France. So we did
Sure.
kind of a little bit of testing that we segmented users into many different like groups. And then for the European users, we kind of tested whether if we delay the ad first interstitial ad timing just by 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, how does this affect the retention curve as well as the LTV? And surprisingly, for users in France, as you might expect, just by delaying the first ad interstitial timing by 3 minutes, it greatly increased the retention rate as well as the IAP conversion rate, which is really interesting because interstitials, they actually are lucrative. On the other side, they're really disturbing the user's gameplay, that
Right.
those who actually see this early might not be as engaged as we want and do not make purchases even. And this kind of had a compound effect on the retention and the IP purchase. So then we thought that, oh, if this is the case, what if we can automate this? What if we can optimize this using the auto segmentation, A/B testing, and reinforcement learning all combined in one piece? Maybe we could really, alleviate the burden of the ad monetization managers having to do manual segmentation, A/B testing, and do it
Right.
again
Right.
and again. Yeah. So this
So,
kind of
so
a
it
Mhm.
it kind of sounds like you guys are just using AI to do a lot of multivariate testing for this specific application, which is like IAA for in-app ads. But then ultimately, you're probably targeting towards how do you maximize LTV, for example.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, I got it. And then so it sounds like so how new is this product, and how like it sounds like there are a couple of use cases or case studies that have been fairly successful. How are customers kind of reacting to this now, or how much has it been rolled out to date?
Hmm. So we've been definitely testing with like 20 different customers even before we launched the product, but the actual launch date was just 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
So, very interestingly, ever since we launched this product, we've been posting some of these things on LinkedIn, some of our case studies, our observations of how this could really, doesn't really negatively impact the retention while raising the LTV. And some of
Yeah.
these case studies have resonated. So we're actually receiving like hundreds of these incoming demo requests from all around the world right now. So initial response from the community is great. And some of the case studies that I can just share with you is
Sure.
something that I really like is about a very cautious mid-core gaming company. So they have experienced that if they show the interstitial ad too early, they knew that certain users from certain countries were certainly going to drop off. So they didn't want this to happen. So they rather took a very conservative approach of showing the first interstitial ads on the 10th stage. So users has to pass all the way from 1 to 9, and then once they reach the 10th stage and clear it, then they'll see the first interstitial ad. So
Mhm.
although this strategy might make sense to certain customers who are higher probability IP users or countries like coming from countries, especially in T1 countries in Europe, but most of the other users, the problem is that 85% of the users are not those kind of users. So they were actually missing out the huge revenue opportunity. So they kind of implemented Airflux and just like let us take from there that every kind of each like ending of the stage, they kind of like let the inference API of the Airflux to take control of whether to show the ads to the users or not. And by after doing that, we have seen a surprising result of the 54% LTV uplift, because there were obviously a lot of revenue that is like on the table that is left behind. So we actually did the segmentation based on the predictive LTV, as well as some of the generic attributes like country OS and some other like playtime, and segment to users. For those users with higher IAP probability, of course, like we didn't show them. We stay patient until like 10th stage or 9th stage. For those users who are not likely to make IAP purchases or just like pretty much used to watching the ads, we just show them anyway from the beginning, which kind of resulted in this kind of huge leap of 54%.
Okay. And so it sounds like even though you're an MMP, it sounds like you're venturing into an area around. Well, I guess that is sort of the job of an MMP to help optimize, to not only collect data and manage attribution data, but also help your customers optimize for revenue and things of that nature. Seems like, however, that a lot of the ways in which people think about MMPs is from the perspective of user acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
You're now you've now have a product that's helping optimize ad sort of inventory or the ways in which ads appear to the player. You're also getting data about those ads. We mentioned before, the potential um, of having, like data from ad monetization impact UA. And when you think about AI and how it's being applied to Airflux, could you imagine a scenario now, given all the things that you have talked about, where AI could potentially co-optimize both together? I'm wondering how you would think about that. It seems like there's an opportunity there, but wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, for sure. So we try to just to clarify, we try to build Airflux as an independent solution from Airbridge. So although it's
Okay,
coming from the same company, we want to build the Airflux as a just a MMP agnostic product. So no matter
got it.
which like MMP solution you're using, you're free to use like to test it out.
Okay.
So when it comes to UA and monetization, we believe just by optimizing the LTV, you can actually create a compound effect both on the LTV side and the CAC side altogether. The reason why is that many of these casual gaming companies are having low profitability, meaning that with just like with every install, they may be just like earning just 1 or 2 cents out of it, and very thin margin that they're kind of on the fence right now. And when it comes to fundamental UA equation, it's all about LTV CAC ratio or the
Mhm.
ROAS. So if your ROAS is positive, say above like 100%, or like even somewhere between 100% and 142%, by counting in this IIP commission fees, you can scale and you can spend more. So LTV uplift, I believe, is tightly tied to your UA strategies because as LTV increases, that means your ROAS improves, which kind of shortens the payback, and suddenly channels or campaigns that previously didn't look profitable are worth testing again. So, for example, I had a good talk with Ricardo of MAF at the previous MAU Vegas last week. And what he's saying is that once you can spend just a 0.01 USD more into the CPI, you can actually get so many more installs because it's all about bidding. It's kind of an auction. If you are
Mhm.
willing to pay more, yes, you
Yep.
can get more quality traffic. So this kind of slightest difference can make a lot of impact on your UA. And lastly, what's interesting is we have seen that the inflow of the new users generally tend to lead to higher eCPM. The reason why is, a lot of these bidders, they assess the users. If the new users comes in, they don't have much information on these users or the less information on these users. So they tend to, give the higher bidding prices to these new users, which kind of in turns leads to the compound effect of your entire game's eCPM goes up. So I think like just in summary, I believe better LTV, better UA, and better eCPM, and it kind of like goes in a one big cycle, which is virtuous to each other.
Got it. And I get the point that you're saying, which is to the one point, which is that even for a slightly higher LTV, because obviously the app stores are an auction-based market, you can get dramatically more. It's not a linear relationship, right? You can get dramatically more UA scale. And then the more UA scale you get, what you're saying is also on the ad monetization side, there's a scale effect to the number of users that you have that are watching ads. And so you get a higher eCPM with some level of scale. So it is a potentially virtuous cycle. But going back to like the practicality of how a studio would think about implementing something, a product of some kind, or maybe you guys are going to create a product that helps to co-optimize using AI or agentic or something, both of these things. Could you talk a little bit more about how that could potentially work?
Yeah, so this is kind of the futuristic, future forward thinking, not that much realized. So once we actually tap into this monetization, we realize the same things could happen in the UA or even the CRM side. Because at the end of the day, it's all about segmenting the users, doing the A/B testing, and if there's an incrementality there, you just do it again and again at scale. So many of these things, the basic principles can be applied back to the UA. For example, let's just think about the segmentation. How do you segment? Is just infinite possibilities of how you segment the users. You can actually just send the audience of your IAP users who have made at least one time a purchase last 30 days. You can just send those users who have like seen the ads, many kind of seed audience can be made, and out of that seed audience, you can make a lot of these lookalike audiences, corresponding lookalike audiences. So the targeting wise, there's this infinite options that you can test out, almost like a segmentation. Creative wise, there's a lot of layers that you can test it out. For example, like it could be UGC, it could be playables, it can be video ads, or it can be display ads, and even under UGC, when you kind of decode it, there's a lot of hooks, there's a lot of main message, there's kind of CTA. So you can just think of it as a when you vectorize all of these variables, it's just the combinations of all these interventions here and there. And right now, what's happening is just users, they just like by instinct or by intuition, they just kind of distribute their budget across all of these different layers of variables and just see how it goes. And that's it. And the feedback cycle is so because it's human done. I've even seen one gaming studio just allocating one full-time marketer just to turn it off, on and off these creatives on and
Yeah.
off every day,
Yeah.
every 3 hours, which is great.
Y-
But I think this eventually can be, to a certain degree, be automated by using the AI, the same kind of principles that we're leveraging for Airflux. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Just in the sense that, like, to your point, there are so many features, knobs, variations, segments, all of these things which a human being can't keep all of those variables in their mind, right? And it's going to be difficult to see the relationships, and especially when you're also taking two different parts like UA and ad monetization as an example, and understanding how they are related, which may not be entirely visible to a human being. And so you take that together, and it does sound like there should be something, an AI tool of some kind that looks at these things and kind of co-manages them together with an understanding of both.
I believe so.
Um,
The reason why is that when we talk about these agentic services, we only talk about the chatbot, the chat UI that you can type in something and get the response back. But
right.
actually, in reality, agentic, the definition itself, is replacing some of the human workflows that are pretty manual or hands-on, that are not automated to the extent where you can just leave it there to the AI. So I think one of the things that we can definitely dramatically change in upcoming 3 to 5 years is some of these manual tasks, both on the UA and monetization side, like segmentation, A/B testing, holdout tests, like all of these reinforcement learning, all combined, can definitely make this loop much smoother, automated, and grow up to scale.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way that LLMs work, right? I mean, you've got gradient descent, which is basically optimizing against, you know, millions of different features, right? And so it's yeah. To your point, I think that um, maybe the next thing we can talk about is, like, we've got all this complexity already, right? In today's market, we've got all this complexity. We've got AI, which we've been talking about, which potentially can manage a lot of this complexity. Some specific things that AI can do. And even within the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen all of these things, all the things that we talked about, right? With respect to SKAN, the SAN stuff, with Meta's AEM, with respect to like CAPI, all these things that are happening. So just to kind of like pause for a moment, and we've talked about a lot of these things, but if I were to ask you to look into the future, the next 2 to 3 years, what do you expect data, like, how do you think data strategies evolve from here?
I don't have a very clear answer to that, but if I am to, see what's going to happen, is I think it's just pretty much the same as what we're experiencing right now. A lot of fragmented data points, or a lot of fragmented data sources, a lot of methodologies. So I can definitely say that more and more, the advice of me just giving out to these bigger studios is to invest into measurement stack, because nothing's gonna solve the this measurement gap easily. So definitely invest in MMP, scan, try out web to app, and also like just casually or regularly running lift studies with Meta and Google or some of the bigger platforms out there. Marketing mix modeling as kind of a high level overview on your budget planning. And sometimes you can even use it as a budget optimizer, just to decrease and increase the budget that is allocated across different channel sources. Yes, you can use the MMM for that. So I believe all of these things combined, and even some there's some other things that I haven't even mentioned today, like data clean rooms or private data marketplaces. So I believe that just mixing just 3 to 4 of these tools in a very adequate but still like ROI positive manner, I think that will be the holy grail of this measurement stack in the future. Unfortunately, but fortunately, I think that's going to be the case. Yeah.
Right. And I think maybe one of the lessons learned is that, and I think I mentioned earlier, with every new kind of major change, there are winners and losers generally. And kind of what we've seen, you kind of touched upon App 11 having a advantage through data. I would submit that like some of these Chinese Forex guys saw an advantage by using specific strategies and things of that nature. And so I think ultimately, whether you're a marketer or an executive or product manager, I think the main message or the main thing that I think that we need to be more cognizant of is how will we gain that alpha? How will we gain that competitive edge? And it's becoming increasingly clear that using data in specific ways, whether it's with more accuracy or to your point on signal, right, will potentially give some game studio a pretty dramatic advantage. And so the next question I have for you, Roy, is that given that, what types of maybe new tools or platforms or signals or something do you foresee emerging to give studios that extra competitive edge?
Got it. So maybe I'm coming from Airflux, so I should definitely reiterate myself on this point that increasing the LTV, especially for the IA revenue, it's just like have a so much bigger compound effect on everything. So I would definitely suggest, just investing more into this ad monetization, and also we can think about ASO. Well, ASO is often something that is pretty undermined, but with ASO you can have like better conversion rates and better LTV altogether. So I would definitely recommend checking out tools like, our tool like Airflux or Press Play by Feature, which is kind of the ASO automation tool that is
Mhm.
really helping casual games like test out. So it's kind of like leveraging the same principles of Airflux, which is interesting that we're all going to the same direction. So once you increase the LTV, you have a lot of these options to explore. For example, like you can diversify your UA channels, like maybe using some of the rewarded ad platforms out there. Because once you have a higher LTV, you can reward the gamers better. And there's like 20, 30 different reward ad channels out there, and you can boost your App Store ranking with the long-term CPA campaigns with that. You can also leverage some of these, playable ads. And second is definitely once you increase the LTV by touch basing the ad monetization and ASO, I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts recently, and certainly the creative production is where the AI benefits the most.
Mhm.
So some of the tools like out there, like Insimo AI, like turning gameplays easily into videos, or Play, which is kind of a playable maker, using the AI, just quickly create these playables for you. A lot of these tools, or like UGC generators like Pool ML, you can leverage them to certainly explode in your creative production. And lastly, I believe that there should be some agentic services coming out in the UA space right now. I've seen some of the ones like Reforged Labs. So once these like UA agents take in place and also automate the budget reallocation or the assessment on each channel campaign creative or country OS, this kind of whole loop is complete. The ad monetization ASO, which kind of helps you increase the LTV, more creatives in place, and certainly more opportunities with more creatives. And lastly, kind of agentic services just running UA kind of combination, optimizing them on and on.
All right, Roy. Well, so just to close or to end the conversation today, I wanted to ask you about kind of practical advice that studios should be thinking about. So I've got three rapid fire questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question is, I'd like to know your number one practical piece of advice today for a studio trying to optimize their user acquisition.
Well, for the bigger studios, invest more into measurement stack. For the smaller ones, try out CAPI.
Okay. And question two, your number one practical advice for a studio trying to improve their monetization strategy?
Smarter segmentation, more A/B testing, all the time.
Okay, and maybe also to use Airflux.
Yep.
Okay,
Try not
okay,
to
and
say
then
so, because you did. I have to admit, yeah.
okay, and number three, a warning or pitfall to avoid when setting up or evolving measurement today.
Well, although last touch point is the default and the most basic stuff, just like biggest pitfall is blindly trusting last touch attribution. And especially when it comes to SKAN, you need to understand that SKAN has a much longer lookback window, like 30 days. And also you need to understand that it's also the last touch point attribution. So although it's great that you use last touch point, just don't, blindly trust it.
Okay. All right. Well, that wraps up our discussion for today on data-driven strategies reshaping mobile growth post-ATT. Huge thank you, Roy. Thank you so much for sharing your practical insights and helping us sort of navigate exactly how to turn data into competitive advantage. For anyone out there interested in a deeper dive into these strategies or exploring more, check out Airbridge's website or connect directly. Can they connect directly with you? I'll leave kind of like
Absolutely.
contact information and information in the show notes. But as always, please tune in to Gamemakers. And for our audience, we will catch you next time. Thanks again, Roy.
Thank you, JK.